You're listening to One Free Family, a new take on peaceful parenting, where you can hear ideas for helping to raise free, independent, and peaceful children. Visit onefreefamily.com to connect and listen. Here are your hosts, James and Taylor Davis.
And we are back, finally, after a couple of weeks of being down and out with the sicknesses that have been going around here in New Hampshire. This is James again.
Coming at ya, and Taylor.
James coming at you, and Taylor Davis. And we're here with One Free Family. We've had the flu. We've had other various ailments
It's been real around here.
It's been real as all. Cavity. We've been just really from top to bottom. It's been pretty tough, but we're actually recording at nighttime. If we sound a little tireder than usual, we had some scheduling stuff happen as well. So we'll do our best to still bring the hot fire that you've become accustomed to.
We've got this.
Yeah, but good parenting hot fire. We wanted to start by thanking the 4 really generous people that have already contributed to the Patreon over at onefreefamily.com/support. That's Katie T, Hannah from Becoming Who You Are, David Parrish, and Kyle Money. You guys are the best. We so appreciate your support. And
Thank
don't worry,
so
we
much.
didn't run off with your patron and stop making episodes. We're actually going to continue making them now. So.
Yep, and our goal really is to get one out every Monday. So that's the plan from here on out.
That's the plan, Stan, like our van named Jan. We actually have a van named Jan.
We do.
You're learning all the details. So we have I think a pretty interesting topic for tonight. And it's one that I know most people who have dealt with any sort of, I guess anyone who makes intentional parenting decisions that might be outside the norm, that might be different from how they were parenting growing up to how their friends or family or siblings or other parents that they're aware of. When you start to make different choices, a certain amount of discomfort can arise. And
absolutely.
That was certainly our experience. And we were talking to another new mom recently who was starting to already, I think before the baby's been born, right? Mm-hmm. Start to dream like, what am I going to say to my parents? They're going to think I'm crazy, right?
Right. Yeah. This person is, already getting really fired up and excited about unschooling and self-directed education and, trying to figure out how that is going to be negotiated in her, larger family.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, so today I think we'll talk through how that's worked for us and our particular parenting choices. But as usual, our parenting choices aren't going to be exactly your parenting choices. And that, of course, is totally okay. But we'll reflect on, some of the decisions we've made and some of our, fears about how people would react and talk a little bit about, how we've tried to process making parenting choices that in some cases also can make people feel uncomfortable. I think one of the realities of making intentional parenting choices is that when you're choosing something for your children and you interact with people that are choosing something else, particularly if they're choosing a mainstream option, it's very natural for them to experience discomfort at first, right?
And I think also for not everybody, but for a lot of people to experience our alternative choice as a direct judgment of them and their choices, which can cause friction and be challenging. Yeah,
for sure. And I think it all comes from this place of deep care that we all have for trying to parent our children in the best way possible. And I think a lot of people who are making, more conventional choices or kind of choices that a lot of people make, when they've been confronted, like many people, like just to take the schooling thing, for instance, many people will have never considered, we were this way at first, will have never considered not sending their kids to some form of conventional school. Right. And so when they hear about people that aren't doing that, that's very naturally going to catch them off guard. And so, I think it'd be fun to talk about, how our approach to sharing our different parenting choices has changed and how, I think we've become a little bit more nuanced in sharing our parenting choices joyfully without coming from a place of, because it can feel uncomfortable for you too, right? Like if you're afraid as to how people will react when you're sharing your parenting choices, I think you can present them in such a way that maybe seems like you're unsure about them or that you present it in a way that might seem judgmental, or you present, your parenting choices in contrast to conventional choices. And I think we've come a long way in terms of trying to just talk about what we do and why we do it, while leaving space for other people to do what they do as well. Yeah,
and I think I want to say too that there's no really like neat and tidy plan for how to do this. So there's not going to be any sort of, finishing off this conversation with this little package for everybody of exactly what to do and how to navigate these challenges. But I just think it's really important to highlight them because I know a lot of people will experience at least some amount of challenge with making a really alternative life choice. And so just talking about that and bringing it out into the open and acknowledging that it's there and that we can continue to move forward with that challenge and work with it the best that we can, I think is really important.
Yeah, 100%. And so I think a reasonable place to begin here is talking about, when you're really thinking about the types of choices you're going to make and why you're making them, understand that the other people in your life will have no access to that kind of journey, right? That path that you went on. And so when you approach someone and say it's someone really important to you, right? Like a parent or a sibling who maybe already has kids, or your best friends who, you always pictured, I don't know, going on vacations with or whatever. Understand that they have no access to your journey and how you arrived to where you're at, right? And so one of the things that, and a sort of approach that I've encountered in other areas, mostly in talking about other things that are really important to you that are unusual, is this concept of an opinion story. And I don't know, we've never talked about that on the podcast before, right?
No, we haven't, but you've written about it.
I did, yeah, at fsp.org, a blog post there. And I think this is a really powerful idea because so the way an opinion story works is instead of walking up to someone, spouting facts at them or walking up to them and saying, I think the best thing to do is keep your kids at home because you don't want to send them to some public school where X and Y bad things are going to happen. Even if you sort of think that, that's not going to win any flies with that kind of honey, right? That's just mostly going to, if they make those choices, feel judged. If they were considering making those choices, maybe feel stupid. And it's going to present you as sort of like, I'm the authority who knows everything, right? I have access to this brilliant information. A much more effective approach, in my experience, has just been, throwing out there what you're doing. Inevitably, people will ask why. You're going to homeschool your kids. You're going to have your kids at home and let them do whatever they want. Why? So instead of saying, well, it's because public schools are so bad, it's doing what we did in episode 1, right? It's talking about, well, we started from this place of our goals. Our goals were to find the best possible childhood for our children that would, make it most likely for them to be on a lifetime path of happiness. I don't know what the exact goal would be, right?
Sure.
But start with goals, right? And because I think when you start with goals, that's indisputable. And I think it's very relatable. When you share your goals and your hopes for your kids, that's going to start people with saying, yeah, me too.
Yeah, there's common ground there.
Yeah, and if it's someone who cares about your kids in particular a lot, like your own parents or, your in-laws or somebody like that, that starts them from a place of, oh, these people aren't just trying to be like anti-authoritarian or trying to be different. They're starting this from a place of trying to find the best solution. Okay, now I'm listening.
They're on a personal journey, right?
Right. And so in our case, this opinion story looks like, well, we were both certified to be public school teachers, and we learned a lot about how to interact with kids, both through that and our experiences at summer camp. But as we started to learn more information, we saw that there was this other thing.
And then we also had a kid who wasn't buying kind of the mainstream approach. That's a big part of our story too. And again, that's not something anybody can argue with, really.
Of course, right. And it's, we were there every day. We saw what was going on when we were dropping him off at daycare and how much he was rejecting that and how much stress it was seeming to cause him and how much stress it was causing us, right? And so the combination of wanting to pick the least stressful life for him and the least stressful life for us, we started to look outside the box, right? Because the inside the box options of being a dual income family who drops your kid off someplace was a huge struggle for us. And now it's not for everybody, right? But that was a problem we were presented with and that we attempted to address. And some of this stuff is still hypothetical at some point too. Like you might not be in the position yet where you're struggling with anything, and you don't need a struggle. You don't need an excuse to make whatever parenting decision that you want to make for yourself. But yeah, talking about that journey, maybe it's telling people you were listening to this podcast and you heard some new ideas.
Or you met somebody who was parenting this way and it, piqued your curiosity.
Right. And so it's this it can be a rather long and drawn out story of, first we listened to this podcast and then this friend of ours was attempting this one certain thing. And I read this book and, as I continued to gather evidence, it really led me towards X new decision that I'm making for my family. And I think it's, first of all, totally honest. It's, you're not trying to sugarcoat anything. You can still land on the brass tacks, the exact things you hope to try.
This was the best choice for us that we could find.
Yeah, like when we looked at all the evidence, we really felt like giving our kids this radically self-directed lifestyle was going to fit with our ethos the best. And so that when you end that story, that opinion story, you leave it off at a place that leaves more space for questioning from the other people, right?
Leaves people more open.
Yeah. And again, you're not trying to tell them facts. You're not trying to say, did you know unschooled kids have the best possible outcomes?
Right, of course.
You're not trying to present this logical case why the right thing for everyone to do
Right.
is X. It's more of a discussion of a personal journey. And that's what parenting ultimately is going to be for everyone anyway. And I understand why parents do feel judged when they hear about, like, some of the time when I hear like people talk about unschooling, which is, mostly can be summed up as the idea that you let kids pursue education on their own terms without, structures from authorities. Oftentimes it will devolve into, we do this because the alternatives are so bad. Right. Mm-hmm. And I don't, first of all, necessarily agree. I think that you can have good outcomes from many different approaches to parenting. But I also know what it feels like when you become resolved that you're going to parent or educate in a certain way.
Well, right. And there's something to be said for, there's something I think to be said for reframing your focus. Like, there are things that I really don't agree with about public school. And those are some reasons that I don't choose to send my kids there. At the same time, there are so many more things that I have found to be so incredibly beautiful about unschooling and about self-directed education. And so reframing it into like the reasons we are choosing this, what is so beautiful and wonderful about this, I think, again, is, I mean, it's a more joyful place for me to be in my own brain and heart, but it's also a much easier way to talk to other people about it, to just talk about all of the awesome things that you're experiencing in your family, or the awesome things that you're reading about that you hope to experience in your family, as opposed to what you think is wrong with the mainstream model.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when we try to, approach things from that perspective and come from this place of, this is why I'm choosing things, it also helps us to own our own choices, which I think is really important for a number of different reasons. The first is that if you're trying something a little bit different than a lot of people, you will probably doubt it at some point, right? Like,
definitely.
You will sit there and, a friend of ours posted in the One Free Family group, which I encourage all listeners to go join. We've been having a lot of really great conversations about some of the more nuanced and challenging parts of parenting in all different ways. But she made a point that said, or she pointed out that sometimes she worries that giving kids more freedom is actually bringing more stress into their life, right? And it's funny because, like, I agree with that. I think that
sometimes it does.
Of course it does. Well, it's going to bring different kinds of stress, right? Like, you're picking, whenever you pick to live your life in any sorts of ways, you're going to choose some kind of stress at the expense of other kinds, right? So if you choose to be self-employed, well, you don't have a boss, but there's no steady paycheck unless you get the work done.
Right. You got to show up and get it done.
Exactly. If you choose to parent in a way that gives your kids freedom, expect that to be stressful for them, because having freedom is hard. It's going to be hard for them, whether they start practicing when they're 4 or when they're 40, or whenever in between. And yeah, you're inviting in the stresses of having to make choices that otherwise can be made for kids. You're also saying that, you're probably putting someone on a path towards being empowered to make more choices throughout life, right? So
I would say too that, again, the sooner that you do start giving, I think it could be hard at any time, but the sooner you do start giving your kids some more agency over their choices, I do think the easier it will be for them.
In the long term.
In the long term, just because they've had less years to get used to decisions being made for them. But, that being said, I think you can kind of make a change at any point. But I would also say that making a change doesn't have to look like throwing up your hands one day when your kid is 12 and saying, okay, all of our rules are gone out the window. You just decide everything for your life. It can be as simple, just trying to say yes more often and trying to listen to your kid each time they come to you more openly. Like, it can be a slow, gradual change.
Yeah. Well, and remembering why you're making the choice, right?
Yeah.
So you're saying, I'm going to invite more stress in the area of decision making into my child's life. And I remember now that the reason I did that was because I look around myself and I think about my own upbringing. And this is my personal experience, where it's very easy to get into the habit of living your life according to other people's rules, right? Most people do this for almost all their childhoods, and in many cases their adulthood as well, right? They go to the med school because that was expected of them. They get the job that was expected of them. They marry around the time that it's expected of them. They have kids, and the list goes on. And I think a lot of that comes from, this kind of implied path that our culture lays out for us. And that can feel less stressful. Like, most of the people I knew leaving high school growing up didn't feel stressed by what should I do next, right? It was like, well, I'm going to go to college. So, and then there was decision making among that perhaps, but it was kind of like, for me, it was like, go to Dickinson or Richmond or something. Those weren't really decisions that it was like I was tearing my hair out over. It was like, whatever, it's all just college. And then for our kids though, yeah, they're going to have practice making decisions, and then they're going to continue, just like everyone, to be faced with very challenging decisions throughout the rest of their lives. And I'm owning that. I'm saying,
right.
I pick that stress.
I pick that. And I would also say that for our kids, so thinking about what our friend, mentioned in this group, and thinking about times when we do doubt the alternative choices that we're making, I think another important piece for me in this particular example, so in giving, in having more space for my kids to make their own decisions, is also understanding and accepting that in that process, they're going to make a lot of mistakes, right? I'm not saying that, oh, my kids are gently parented and unschooled, and so like they're geniuses who make the best decisions all the time, and I can just let them make all their decisions because they're not going to mess up because this is just so perfect. Like they're going to make mistakes all the time, and sometimes they're going to get it right, and sometimes they're going to make a big mistake. And they may make more mistakes actually for a while than maybe, kids who aren't given the space to make those mistakes. But there's so much learning that happens in those mistakes because they're not making those mistakes and then just kind of moving on with their day. They're making those mistakes and they're recognizing what happened, and they're coming to us and we're having conversations about how that choice felt and what might have been an alternative for that decision. Not in an I told you so way, but in a like, let's talk through this because I'm your partner and I want to help you think about it for next time. How did that decision feel for you?
Right.
I can see you're having a little trouble with the outcome or something. So there's so much conversation that is happening with that decision making, even when they're pretty little, I would say, in age appropriate ways. So again, thinking about our friend who posted, her kids are somewhat younger. But I think kind of inviting in that discomfort and inviting in just space for mistakes to happen, and knowing that that's the way that we can help our kids actually become self-actualized people who have practice with decision making.
Yeah. And, understanding too that no matter what you choose as a parent, every path has hard parts about it, right?
Yeah.
And every path is going to have weird challenges that come up that you weren't prepared for. And again, this comes back to the general theme of the episode, which is owning our choices. Sometimes it can be I think the hardest challenges to face are ones that are presented to your family that you could have avoided by taking the more conventional path.
Definitely, right? Because if something goes wrong, it's really easy to blame the alternative choice that's being made.
Right. Or your kid's struggling with something. Maybe your kid just does struggle with, anxiety or decision making, or, they have trouble making friends, whatever your kid is struggling with. It's so easy to look at what which is your life, and that you did something a little bit unusual, and it's easy to feel guilty and wonder, well, geez, is my kid this way because I chose these parenting things? And the fact is, you're never going to know.
Right.
So you can beat yourself up about it or not, but just know that it's very, very unlikely that had you chosen some other approach, that your kid was just going to be perfect with no problems and, totally happy all the time and totally respectful and, cleaning up after themselves or whatever your current issue of the day is.
Life just isn't that clean.
No, it really isn't. And I think, when we think about owning our choices, so much of it comes down to going into each choice with as clear a head as possible. And I think when I think about our approach to parenting, yeah, sometimes it's hard. It's been hard recently, if we're going to be real. There's been some stuff that's been really, really challenging for us recently, really stressful, leading to conversations between you and I where we're not at our best. And that's really hard, and that's not fun. And if we worked 9 to 5 and did have our kids going off some places, some of those things probably would have been avoided, but it wouldn't have been worth it. It wouldn't have been worth avoiding those stresses, because when we believe so firmly, when we did all the work up front to know that we wanted to choose X, it's okay to then look back and say, okay, yeah, life is a little bit harder now, and this is what we chose. And I think this is also, and this segues into, I think, another big portion of the idea of owning your choices, because it's all well and good to say yeah, be confident, own your choices. And when you're approaching other people, be delicate with them about their feelings and stuff. But sometimes they're going to be judgmental of you, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes they're going to question your choices, and they're going to look at your kids and what your kids struggle with, and they're going to offer their opinions and say things like, well, geez, have you ever thought that if you just did this thing differently, then your kid wouldn't be having such a hard time right now?
Right.
And that's hard, right? I mean, we've encountered that.
Yeah. I think, I think there's a few things to talk about there. I think there's kind of a conversation about how might you actually respond to that person in the moment, right? Because that's a tricky one, and that's going to differ based on personality styles and relationship. And then there's also the piece of the conversation that's about, again, continuing to do the work to stay really firm on your why and on your goals for your family, and knowing so that those situations, even if they're hard, they don't shake you so badly eventually when you keep doing this work. Yeah.
Well, and also it's kind of, and I don't think it comes from a badly intentioned place, but like, especially if someone in your life is skeptical about the decisions you're making, and even again, not in sort of a rude way, but they're just like weirded out. They're like, especially if you're making decisions as unusual as us, they are probably going to look for areas where it's not working.
Right.
Just as a matter of course, right? Because they're like, hold on, every single person I know.
It's just not fitting with their worldview.
Exactly.
Right.
And so then say, like one of the ones that's come up for us is like, say using an iPad, right? We'll be somewhere or someone will come over to our place and maybe one of our kids is like, I'm bored, and then goes and like uses an iPad for a while, right?
Right.
This is something that is more commonplace now for a lot of people, but in like sort of like woke parenting circles, it's like, ooh, you don't want to let like a device parent your child, or you don't want them to default to that when they're feeling bored or use that as a crutch or anything like that, right? And so I can remember a time specifically, and I don't want to give away too many details, but where someone was like, oh yeah, like I think kids just do need a certain amount of structure, right? And so it's like, it's this moment of sort of weakness because, like, again, if you're not fully owned in your choices, or that something like that is probably making someone else in the room uncomfortable, especially if they have their own kids and they don't allow them to do similar things, they're opening up a conversation like, ooh, do you see how your parenting choice might be wrong in this instance? What do you say in an instance like that?
What do you say?
Well, we've been in that spot, right? I mean, we've been in the spot where someone directly points to a parenting decision that we've made. And again, I always wonder about how personal I get on this because I know a lot of like family and friends listen and stuff. And mostly I just don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And I don't think it should hurt anyone's feelings. We're just talking about our experience parenting. But in a situation like that, like they are trying to have a conversation about how you might be making a bad parenting decision. Right. So you don't have any guesses as to what you've been saying in a spot?
Oh, I don't know what I would say in a spot like that. I mean, I suppose that, I don't know.
Well, sometimes you can, so I think it goes a couple ways.
I would say something in the moment for sure. Right now, I'm not sure what it would be.
Well, in the moment, I'm rarely prepared for something like that because again, I never make comments like that about other people's parenting. And I think it's a funny thing about parenting decisions because like, I think people in general are pretty respectful of other people's parenting choices. Like they don't tend to, I told you so people for however they're deciding to parent. But again, if you're doing something sort of unusual and it's someone that really cares about your kids, like they might offer up like hey, have you noticed that this is happening and that your kid is struggling with this? I think in the moment, I'm very rarely prepared for it. And I'll just kind of like laugh uncomfortably and try to change the subject. That's like
kind of like I just did.
Yeah, exactly. The approach. But I think there is something you can offer up. I think it's okay if someone challenges us on our parenting choices. I think it's okay to, stiffen up a little bit and not in like a rude way, but just say, yeah, I think the idea of structure is such a fascinating one, right? It's like so hard for so many of us to imagine our childhoods without the structure that we had. And so seeing a kid who doesn't have the same structures imposed upon them is a little different, isn't it?
And I think, and if you're talking about the structure one in particular, I would also probably, eventually say something like in our parenting, I'd be explaining to this person, in our parenting, we've tried really hard to stay away from blanket statements about what people need because we've really seen that each of our kids and every kid in the world and every person is a really, really individual, unique person and has a really different set of needs. So yes, there are people who really love and crave structure. There are also people who don't need structure at all. I mean, like James and I are a perfect example. I really like structure. It helps me.
Right.
James doesn't really need it. And we actually have a combination of kids who like it and don't like it as much. Yeah. I mean, we even have one kid who essentially, the cool thing is with this, you get to know your kids so well that like one of our kids in some ways has created the amount of structure with our support that he needs in his own life to make sure he accomplishes the things that he wants to accomplish.
He's setting timers to brush his teeth.
Exactly. Whereas like the other kid could care less about structure and he pops in and out of whatever is moving him in the moment and he's super happy to do it that way. So I think I would say something to that effect too. Like I hear you concerned about, our kids not having the level of structure that you think is ideal, but really I don't think a statement that all kids need structure can really be a fair statement because kids are so different.
Well, for sure. And I think there's also a question, there's a chicken or the egg question when it comes to kids that quote unquote need structure, because if you've become dependent upon structure, it's very natural for you to continue to need it.
Right. There's going to be a long, uncomfortable period until you figure out how to function without outside imposed structure.
Yeah. And the question, I guess, for us would be, do we want that earlier or later? Because again, at some point you're going to move into adulthood and there are still going to be structures if you want to seek them. You can find a job probably and find a college that'll tell you what your requirements are and all that kind of stuff. And ultimately it is your choice. It's the illusion of structure that you sort of choose for yourself. And I think when someone says, kids need structure, what they're actually communicating, I think it's important not to, again, take it personally, which is really hard. It's really hard, but we're trying to be mindful of putting things in such a way that make it less likely for other people to take things personally. But we want to reflect on ourselves and say, when someone feels discomfort at the way we're parenting, even if they are judging, because some people will. Mm-hmm. So I know that there are people who have heard about how we parent and the choices we make for our kids. And just by how they parent that's so diametrically opposed, they have to feel like we're doing the wrong thing, right?
Sure, of course.
But the question is, does it matter? Does it matter if there are people in the world that think you're parenting wrong? And how much does it build us up to worry about pleasing those people? Because I would never, I think when I look forward to the future and my hope is to parent with as few regrets as possible, I think it's very unlikely that I wake up 20 years from now and I'm like, ooh, this person was right all along. I should have provided more structure or whatever. Way more likely, I know from times I felt regret in the past, is, wow, I really let these other people influence how I parented in a way that I didn't choose for myself. And that's hard. If you're in a situation, and I've talked to no shortage of, oftentimes it can come from spouse to spouse, and maybe that's a conversation for the future. Now, we haven't really had that experience since by and large we've been on the same page with a lot of stuff, but
I think that's a common one.
It's really hard. Yeah. And it's one of the hardest ones, I think. And it goes back to that thing of there are people in your life who really, really care about your kid and they just want what's best for your kid too. But it's inside you, right? If you've done the research and you've put the time in and you think that 15 years from now, you're going to sit there and be like, man, I really, really wanted to parent in a different way than I did. Yeah. I think that's going to be a place you don't want to be.
That's a heartbreaker.
Yeah. That's my suspicion.
Yeah. And so I want to say a little bit more, I think, just about specifically, I think, the people really close to us in our lives and how we might handle that. In thinking about how you want to be raising your kids, how you might navigate that, let's say, with your own parents. Right. And now that's really complicated because everybody has a different relationship with their own parents. Some people have really, really positive ones. Some people don't have as much contact with their parents. So it's going to be a really kind of case-by-case basis. But I would say that, first off, if you have, you're parenting your kids in this way that you hope to be, and you feel or actually outright have any sort of questioning from your parents, I would first say, again, remind yourself that this is probably coming because your parents really care about you and care about your kids. So I would start there. I think it's a really good reminder to just sit with that and be like, okay, this isn't coming from a place of malintent or anything. They just really care and they've never seen this before. I would also say that I think if your parents are open to it, I think it's a really great idea to invite them to engage with some of the resources that you've engaged with. Because I think a lot of people would grasp onto that. So I would think about the person that is having doubts, think about kind of their learning style and what you know about them and see what you can offer up to them. Whether it's a book, if that's their style, or some short little articles that you could send them links to, or a podcast.
Wink, wink.
Just, ways to kind of get them engaging with the information that you've been engaging with, because then it gives you something to talk about.
Sure.
And I would say, some people will take you up on that and run with it, and you'll be having these great conversations, and that will be really helpful. Yeah. Some people will not read a word of what you sent them. Mm-hmm. And then that's, I think, a place where, again, there's a lot of kind of inner work that needs to happen with coming back to your why and why you're making this choice, and realizing that like you can still love your parents very much, but be making a choice for your kids that they may not agree with, and that can still be okay.
Well, sure. And I think it also, when you do stuff like that, it does two things. It first of all reminds you of why you're making the choices, because you're like, oh yeah, because I read this amazing article about how much better kids learn when they're self-directed or whatever. Oh yeah, of course I believe this. Like, and it also communicates to them how intentional you're being about it, which I think,
it's not just a random
because I think, especially you were talking about like in the case of one's own parents, like you have to remember that these people knew you from when you were like a toddler trying to like put the plunger in your mouth and like just do all sorts of random stuff. And so like presumably they've separated that from who you are now and like you're a parent, but it doesn't hurt to just show them like, oh, I'm not rushing into this. Like, here's this article, here's this podcast, here's this research, this TED Talk, like whatever. And we're thinking really, really hard about this. So whether they open the article or not, I think it
shows your intentionality.
Yeah, it lends more credibility to it. And I wouldn't do it ever just for that purpose. Like, I don't think you necessarily need to explain yourself to anybody.
Right. Agree.
But if we're remembering that everyone has the best intention or the best hopes for the child in mind, and everyone is coming from a well-meaning place of generosity and like, you know, has good intentions around how that kid is going to turn out, that's just good for everyone involved. Sharing resources, I think, is a really good thing when it comes to owning our choices in that regard. And so this is another one though. So someone comes to you, they're questioning something, especially in a moment of weakness. What do we do to not further that gap, right? So like, it's already like, in my opinion, like a little bit odd to come right up to someone and question their parenting choices. Again, not behavior I would hope to engage in, but it's pretty common when you're doing something unusual. So someone comes up to you in the street, and says to your kid, like, hey, what grade are you in? Right. And the kid says, I don't go to school. I play all day. That's what Ollie told a soccer coach one time. So if that person comes and they're like questioning and they're like, you let your kid play all day? Like, how do we respond in a time like that? Maybe when we are feeling judged in such a way that doesn't like make it an argument, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's a hard one because I'm assuming you mean this is just like a random stranger.
Well, it depends. It can be anyone. It can be like, I've had it online, like on a Facebook post I've made. I've had it in person with strangers.
Yeah, it's tricky because I think, you know,
it depends on the situation.
It does depend on the situation because to some extent, I really don't feel like I need to defend myself to anybody. You know, I don't want to be in a position where I'm kind of feeling like I'm being antagonized. I almost don't even want to respond if it's actually really antagonistic. Like if I can, so I think what I try to do is I try to read the person. Whether it's in person or online. Is this person instantly kind of really antagonistic? Because if so, personally, I'm probably just not going to engage with them because I don't think that with a person like that I really have any hope of getting them to see my perspective.
Right.
And I don't, again, if this is not somebody that I deeply care about, I feel like it's just a waste of my time, honestly. Yeah. And maybe I wouldn't have said that a few years ago. Like I think I've gotten to a point where I'm a lot more comfortable with our decisions that I feel like there are certain people who are going to approach us about it that I can just say, I'm just really not interested in having this conversation.
Well, right. This happens in the abstract all the time, right? Like when you were online the other day, someone had posted, I think Peter Gray posted one of his articles about video games, right? And someone jumped right in with a very judgy, aggressive comment about people who let their kids under some age, 5 or 10, I can't remember what it was, use devices, right? And like, it's hard not to take it personally when someone says like, you're rotting your kid's brain or whatever, right? Like,
sure, but that person also, I didn't perceive their comment as super aggressive at all. I think they had some thoughts that I disagreed with, but they also seemed open to some of the ideas, which is actually why I responded. So I think, again, that's where the difference is. Like if somebody, you know, let's say says, you know, to my kids, what grade are you in? And they answer, well, we're not in a grade. We homeschool, we play all day. And they're kind of, the person is asking questions in like an open way. I'm happy to have a conversation. I'm happy to say, you know, yeah, we believe really strongly in self-directed education. And here's, again, back to the opinion story. Here's how we got here. And here's what's, you know, been so awesome about it for us. But it really, really depends on the person and on their demeanor.
Yeah, if they're coming from like an earnest place of questioning, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's so cool. I really want to talk to them.
Yeah,
then.
I love engaging in conversations like that. And it's also worth noting too, it's when you're talking to your own kids about your unusual parenting choices, I think it makes total sense to explain to them why you're doing what you're doing and, you know, your opinion story and all that reasoning. Understand that whatever you explain to your kids is what they're going to explain to other people too.
Right.
And so if you go down a judgy path for them, expect them to tell that to your neighbors and to your parents and like whoever else. And if that's not if you're going to feel uncomfortable with them sharing that story in that way, like it's helpful to you're not coaching them up on it, but like you're giving them the tools to explain it in a way that doesn't put them in an awkward position.
Well, you're guiding them and teaching them how to, ultimately they can still say whatever they want, but you're just guiding them, at least my kids can, but you're guiding them and just teaching them, you know, how to have productive conversations and talking about, you know, it's also okay if you just don't want to have the conversation. If an adult asks you a question that makes you uncomfortable and you don't want to talk about it, that's okay too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good point. I think it's interesting when it comes to like our kids being involved too, because whenever you choose something outside of the norm and you choose that for your children as well, you do put them in the position of, you know, getting to share that story with other people. And it always fascinates me to interact with like grown, unschooled sort of kids or like people that have been on alternative educational paths and like see how they're owning it. I mean, normally I haven't interacted with that many actually, but the ones that I have interacted with have been confident and, you know, well-spoken about it and haven't come across as real judgy or anything like that. And I guess that's what I hope for myself too.
Yeah.
So last piece before we get going, I think, cause we're running longer than I expected, on our later, well, it's our late night podcast. You know, let's be real. It's not come with the same energy as usual potentially, but I think it's worth talking specifically about, you know, this idea of owning choices and moving into, so say like you're making a big parenting change, right? Like you're in a position where you had a plan to parent in some way and now you're going to parent in a different way and you're ready to like bring that to the world. And you're feeling concerned, you're feeling, you know, worried that people are going to ask you questions that perhaps you're not ready for. You're feeling it's probably maybe a little bit new to you still. You're really excited about an idea and you start to share this story with the world and someone comes to you with something that you don't have a great answer for. Cause this can happen sometimes, right? Like if someone comes to you and says, hey, so what are you going to do about learning physics when they're in high school, right? And maybe for whatever reason, that's not something that you had really considered. Oh yeah, my kid's going to be self-directed, but crap, at some point they're going to be 15. And if they want to learn, you know, quantum physics, I can't teach them that. And you know, that there are answers to that specific question, right? But at some point someone is going to ask you a question, very likely that you don't have a perfect answer for. So how do you prepare for that moment? And what would you do after?
I mean, I'm sure that's happened to me many times. I think I guess I think it's also just okay to say, you know, this is kind of a new journey for me and I haven't thought through everything that could happen. And, you know, I imagine that most parents, no matter what path they're choosing, have some hypothetical scenario that could be presented to them that they're not sure what they would do.
Right.
And I think that that's, again, I don't think that anybody needs to feel like or even pretend like they have all the answers. I think it's just okay. I don't know.
No, I think that's right. But I think it doesn't feel that way. You know, like when you believe something unusual and you get questioned or really like had your feet held to the fire, and especially when it's someone you really care about, like a parent or something, and you don't have an immediate answer, it's easy to feel stupid, I think. And it's easy to feel like you've been caught in a trap or, you know, and it's easy to move that into a place of, now we're in an argument or now like this person thinks I'm a moron and I'm going to ruin my kid's life or something like that. And just know that you can own your choices and understand that there are things that you haven't prepared for, I guess is the thing I would love to leave people with.
You can't possibly prepare for everything.
You know, when you hear about, like, I remember when we first started getting into this kind of thing and there were people I put on a pedestal, you know, in terms of people that seem to have it all figured out in the unschooling movement or in the self-directed parenting movement. And I remember thinking about them as like, oh, those are the people who know everything. And I'm just like this guy who's just getting started. I don't know anything, you know, like my mom is going to ask me about why we're doing X or Y. And like, I'm going to not have the right answer. And I felt self-conscious about it, you know? And I think that I've heard that same sentiment reflected by other people I know, especially new parents who are maybe thinking about going in this path in the long term or whatever. And I think whatever you're choosing as a parent, understand that just in the same way, the default approach to parenting doesn't have all the answers either. Like,
right.
Just in the same way that no approach to parenting in human history has had all the right answers. When someone says, well, what are you going to do if your kid doesn't want to go to college, or, whatever your thing is, it's okay to say, that's a really good question. I'm going to chew on that for a while.
Yeah. And this is also making me think that I might also have a conversation just about, well, I guess one of the things that has been something that I've learned through this process that I didn't really know or fully believe before, or something I've learned to do, is to think so much more creatively about solving problems. So I think when faced with a question like, well, what if this happens? I think I might also be able to say something like, I'm not sure exactly what I would do about that, but I'm also confident that with this approach that I will have developed a relationship with my kids where we can have like a really creative problem solving conversation around whatever this is and figure it out, however that looks, whether it's, really messy or not. I can actually think of an example. This was years ago. I don't even think Ezra was born. So I think, our oldest was like a toddler. And I was talking with a friend who also had one toddler. And so this was in the stage when we were like really, really freshly kind of diving into all of these resources about unschooling and self-directed education and attachment parenting and gentle parenting. And it was also exciting at the time, but also also very scary and new. And so we were talking about kind of what it would look like as our kids got older. And we were specifically talking about the idea of like really giving kids a lot of freedom to be autonomous people. And my friend, who I love dearly, asked me, actually, this like gave it a perfect example of what you're talking about, like a scenario. And it was something like, and it was like a small thing, but it was like, what if like your kids don't clean up after themselves because you give them so much freedom? And again, this is when we each only had a toddler. So that was like a, into the future, a hard thing to wrap your brain around. And I kind of sat there and I thought, well, right, common wisdom is that kids need to learn to clean up after themselves. And the way they learn to clean up after themselves is by being made to clean up, right?
Punishments or rewards.
They need to learn responsibility, so we make them do things, and that's how they learn responsibility. That's kind of like the common approach. So I thought a little bit, and I said, well, I guess I feel like they don't really ever need to clean up. Like maybe they won't ever need to clean up after themselves. Like maybe we can maybe I can help them, or maybe I can, I remember kind of thinking out loud with her as we were talking, like I kind of I started to see so many, all of a sudden, like all these doors were opening in my brain, and I started to see so many different alternatives to the common expectation.
Right.
'Cause I actually, in this conversation with her, came to the point of like, I don't think there will ever be a time when my kids need to clean up after themselves. Like need isn't let's dig into the word need. Am I annoyed that their stuff is all over the place? Maybe I am. Do I want to sit down and talk with my kids about how that's really hard for me? And can we talk as a family about like how to work together to make it a little bit easier? And I can explain my perspective and they can explain theirs. There's like all of this space between either your kids have complete disregard for you and leave your house in shambles, or you force them to clean up. Like there's so much gray area in there, and so much learning and conversation and like trying things. Maybe it doesn't work. You try something else. And so I think just being able to kind of also be confident in the fact that there's always more options for solutions than you might think at first.
Right. And I think it's, the exciting thing about parenting intentionally is that you can be open to hard questions that change your mind about things, right? So like, if someone asks you a question and you can tell if someone is in like a gotcha sort of tone, or if it's
and this person was
sincere
not.
question.
Yeah.
But either way, like someone could ask you a question, and I think if you're caught off guard by it, it's okay, and probably even sometimes fun to say, wow, I haven't totally thought about that yet. Like, what a cool thing to wonder about. And do the thinking out loud thing, throw out a couple of different options, but also say like, yeah, thank you so much for that question. Like, I'm going to definitely go sit with that.
Something new to learn about.
Because chances are good. Like we talk about owning your choices. The main choice that I think we make is that we hope to be open-minded to continue to find new information that's even better than the information we have now.
Right.
And so someone coming up to me, and I think this can be helpful in approaching your parents or, your loved ones in other regard. If they ask you a question that you're not prepared for, that doesn't need to be a source of fear. You're not parenting in the way you're parenting to impress anybody.
Right.
You're parenting because it feels like, if you're like me, probably the most important thing you've ever done. And when something is that important, hard questions that point out the dents in the armor and, the things that could be a little bit better are actually exciting. And, hopefully as we continue on with this podcast, like you all will continue to ask us hard questions too. And, we can continue
we've already gotten some that required some deep thought. I think also, establishing like the more that you dig into all of this stuff, the firmer you will get on your individual base reason that you are doing this. And there might be a lot of reasons that you have and you see a lot of potential benefits. But like I know for me, in all the work that I've done so far, where I am right now, my like at the very, very core of why I'm doing this is because I believe it gives me the shot at having the best possible relationship with my children. And I think that having a good relationship with them is going to be beneficial in so many ways that I don't need to talk about now because that could be a whole other episode. But for me, sometimes when I'm feeling challenged, whether it's by something someone says or just by a choice that I'm making that feels new and different, I have gotten into the practice of like holding so tightly to my why and to that relationship piece. And I kind of use that as like my barometer, like whatever that thing is that's making me falter, I check in, like, is the choice that I'm making in regards to that thing helping to further like strengthen my relationship with my child? And if the answer is yes, then I can feel confident in what I'm doing, even if I'm being kind of questioned on it. So I think that's, that might not be your why, but if you can, keep digging into what yours is and kind of hold that up as your barometer, I think that can also be really helpful.
Yeah, that can be really informative in terms of both owning your choices for yourself and then owning them for other people too.
Yeah.
So, and a quick response to any questions that you're unprepared for also, like, I guess, I'm not prepared for that, but I always try to think in terms of how I can have the strongest possible relationship with my kids.
Right.
And so
you can say that out loud to the person who's asking you, for sure.
Right on. Well, I think we have run up against it, my dear. So
all right. Nobody woke up while we were recording.
Yeah, that was the odds were against it.
They were.
Given how things have been going recently, but we nailed it. We don't have our pithy statement that we like to share at the end, but do you want to give it a shot?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's authentic.
Let's
so,
hear it.
Well, yeah, just leaving you with, obviously so grateful that you're on this journey with us. And my little reminder that every moment is a new chance to make the choice that you want to make.
Yeah, that was pretty close.
Close enough.
Yeah. All right. Love you guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to One Free Family. If you enjoy the podcast, please show your support by becoming a patron at onefreefamily.com/support. Your support will help make this show better. Plus, you can get access to rewards and additional episodes by joining. Again, that's onefreefamily.com/support. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.